And the deadline for Kurdish SDF fighters to fully integrate into the Syrian army has now passed. Syria says the talks with the group have produced no tangible results. And Turkiye is saying that it backs Damascus if Damascus chooses now to move against the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. The Kurdish-led SDF is supported by the U.S. and it controls key areas of eastern Syria, including oil fields. It is led by the Kurdish People's Protection Units and Arab fighters. It dismantled ISIL's final stronghold in Raqqa City in eastern Syria in 2017. It controls parts of Aleppo and a quarter of Syria. 900 U.S. troops are stationed in its territory to help prevent a resurgence of ISIL. Rob Geist-Pinfold is a lecturer in international security at King's College London. He joins us live from London. Rob, set the scene for us. Just how important is it really to Syria's future that the SDF, who control a quarter of the country, actually integrate into the national army?
Well, Cyril, it is absolutely critical for the building of a new and stable Syria. I think it's worth mentioning that what happens in eastern Syria does not stay in eastern Syria. Yes, these discussions and disputes are between the Kurdish-led SDF, the central government in Damascus, and also to a degree Turkiye. But there are other groups in Syria who are watching to see what the outcome of these negotiations and these tensions will be. You have, of course, the Druze spread throughout Syria, but particularly in Suwaida in southwestern Syria, who are pushing increasingly for a degree of federalism or even separation. You also have the Alawites in western Syria, in the coastal regions, who also do not trust the central government. And there have been increasing calls for Alawite separation from Syria and even an alliance with Israel. So what happens in eastern Syria is absolutely critical for the country's future. No one wants an escalation. That's in no one's interest, be that Turkiye, Damascus, or the SDF. But as we've passed that deadline now for the integration of the SDF, that's failed to occur. The discussions and debates are continuing. We're hearing increasingly hardline rhetoric from both sides. This suggests that the basic key fundamental issues remain unresolved. How will the Kurdish regions be integrated? What will that look like? And how will a framework be devised where Kurdish Syrians feel that their rights are upheld, but at the same time the government feels that it is actually exercising its sovereignty, not just in eastern Syria, but throughout the country?
Rob, the Kurds are resisting this. We've established that. But it's understandable to an extent because they were persecuted under the previous regime of Bashar al-Assad and the fear that that could happen again. They ended up under Assad controlling their own territory. They now have a quarter of Syria. They control themselves. Why would they give that up?
Well, you're right, Cyril. And it's, as I say, it's not just the Kurds that distrust the central government, it's other minority groups as well. And this is the problem here. The Syrian government has to prove that it is not sovereign in name only. It's sovereign in practice as well throughout all of Syria. But it has to exercise sovereignty in a way that includes minorities and doesn't foment or exacerbate sectarian tensions, as we saw in other parts of Syria throughout last year. And this is the core and the crux of the issue here. As you say, the Kurds feel like they have exerted significant resources. They paid a high price in blood. They fought against ISIL in order to establish an autonomous, basically an autonomous republic in eastern Syria. They are not keen on giving that up. However, they know that a confrontation with Damascus is not in their interest. It raises the spectre of sectarian violence. It means that Turkiye is likely to intervene. And it's also worth mentioning that we talk of the SDF as a Kurdish group, but the majority of its fighters, around 2/3 of its fighters, are actually Syrian Arabs. So there's a question as to how much those groups will actually want to fight a fellow Sunni Syrian Arab regime in Damascus, or whether they might want to fold into that government there. So the SDF does not want to see fighting. Turkey does not want to see fighting because that would mean that it would be on a collision course with the US. It would undermine all of its work that it's put into Syria so far. far in causing instability in the country, and it would also imperil its outreach to the Kurds. Remember that President Erdogan recently came to an understanding with the PKK, where the PKK would disarm and disband. Any confrontation with the SDF would imperil that outreach to the Kurds as well, which is a core pillar of Turkey's grand strategy.
Okay, so Rob, I've set you. This was a trap. I've set you up for this next question, which is I'm not sure it has an answer. You've explained to us that Turkey's unity requires that the SDF integrate into the army. You've also explained to us that the SDF have no reason to do that. They have no real big incentive to do that. So can this get fixed?
It's a very, very difficult problem to fix. It can get fixed. We saw that both sides agreed in March last year to fix this. The devil is in the details. Both sides signed on paper formally saying that we want the SDF to fold into Syria. That was a huge move, significant progress. The question is what this would look like on the ground. The Syrian government basically wants the SDF's armed forces to integrate and be spread throughout the Syrian armed forces. So basically taking apart the command and control structures of the SDF and spreading them throughout the Syrian army. The SDF wants something more along the lines of autonomy and to keep its existing command and control structures. It still doesn't trust the central government. It still feels like it needs that army. It has no incentive, as you suggest, to disband. What's likely to emerge, if we get there, is something along the lines of a compromise where some of the SDF units, particularly the Arab SDF units, do fold into Damascus' control, and the Arab-dominated areas of SDF territory do the same, whereas the Kurdish areas and the Kurdish-led parts of the armed forces could see more of an autonomous structure where they exercise a degree of federalism within a Syrian state whilst proclaiming loyalty to it. That's the current framework. What we heard before talks broke down again is that the Syrian government were willing to let 3 SDF battalions stay intact, Kurdish-led battalions in Kurdish-majority areas. The problem now is breaking this impasse and getting us back on the right track. This will require significant and sustained mediation from the key player here, whom no one wants to get on the wrong side of. That's the US under President Trump.
All right, Rob Geist-Pinfold joining us from London this hour. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.